Good morning and welcome back to Sunday Storytime here on Gaming with ADHD, where today we're going to try something a little bit different by reading through the Battletech Gothic Universe Primer. Now, I'm currently working on a series of videos. I've already done an unboxing, I've got miniature reviews that are going to be coming out, and I'm also working on going through a deep dive of the actual rules themselves. But with that said, I thought it would be kind of fun to do a read through of the Universe Primer, um, just because we can. So, with this, it is going to be a little bit different. Normally, I just read the story and, cut. But today, we're going to read through. If I have any commentary that I want to give, I'm going to be doing that as well. I'll actually have my face on the screen this time, but we'll go from there. So, with that said, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. I try to put out a few videos each week covering all sorts of tabletop gaming content, and I'd love for you to come along and see what I have to share. As I said, this is going to be this will be actually the second video in the series covering Battletech Gothic, and so make sure you're subscribed so that you can see when new videos come out. All right. With that said, let's get started. All right. So first off, I actually really do like this cover. We've got one of the big old abominations over here, some of the littler ones, and then we've got a phoenix hawk, a rifleman, and a scorpion all on screen, and then of course some more abominations down here on the bottom. It's fun. Say what you will about it. I'm kind of excited. All right. So, the Gothic Battletech universe. A universe in shadow. It is an age of endless war. On the blackened worlds of dwindling stars, lumbering battle mechs, and horrific creations of rampant biotechnology tear at one another in a desperate struggle for survival and dominance. Where once the human sphere lived in a golden age under the banner of a glorious star league, today only the unraveling empires of the six great realms remain to squabble over horror-scarred wastelands. In the spaces between, marauders and privateers eke out a cutthroat existence of their own, relying on salvage and thievery to bolster their forces. It is a universe where right and wrong have lost all value, where victory belongs only to the strongest, and where the end of civilization is always just a heartbeat away. From the Litany of Time, Karpov Press, Terra, 3015. Hearken, one and all, to the echoes of history. Ever since humankind pulled itself out from the primordial sludge of prehistoric Terra, it has known little beyond savagery and war. From the earliest days of the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon to the rise of the tribes of Homo sapiens who would one day found the first city-states, our existence has been one of conflict-driven evolution. To survive and thrive, we needed to be not just stronger and faster, but smarter and more inventive. More than any other apex predator, humanity honed its lethality in battle, not only against nature and its myriad creations, but against its own kind. As we overcame the immediate impulses of instinct, we learned to think ahead to our next fights, to our next conquests, and soon the creation of ever more effective tools for bloodshed became as natural to us as breathing. From the earliest spears to the latest in anti-mech lasers, we have become masters of weaponry. After millennia of creating, fumbling civilizations that rose and fell in war after war over Terra's global resources, we unlocked the miracle of fusion power, only to immediately turn its potential toward a glorious new age of fighting for the stars and worlds beyond. For humanity, our history shall always be written in blood. The Age of War, 2100 to 2569. Between the development of practical fusion technology and the subsequent discovery of effective faster-than-light travel, it was inevitable that humans would reach out to colonize the stars. Indeed, for many, leaving Terra couldn't happen fast enough. be it for the sake of self-enrichment and power or to escape the oppression of the Terran Alliance, the first world-spanning government in history. New worlds were sought out for exploitation and settlement. The exodus that followed empowered the wealthy and the downtrodden alike. Thus began the Great Migrations. At first, the migrations represented the Alliance at its apex, an interstellar unity across the human sphere. But the Terran government would not long survive its own success. Grown corrupt and greedy, Terra enacted policies and taxes that quickly wore on the distant systems. When the inevitable rebellions began, Terra's might proved an illusion. Embittered by what it saw as an ungrateful insolence, the Alliance quickly turned its back on the colonies, abandoning even loyal systems whose very survival depended on Terran support. Thus ended humanity's first great empire of stars. As Terra turned inward and the Alliance collapsed, new governments emerged from the power vacuum. Drawn together for trade and mutual defense against an unstable cosmos, the strongest and most resourceful colony systems, some as far as 400 light-years from Terra, forged the basis of new interstellar states, the seeds of empires yet to come. As these emerging powers grew, their clashing borders erupted with conflict. Thus began the Age of War. For centuries, continuous strife plagued humanity from the heart of Terra itself to the frontiers of its most distant progeny. It was in this crucible that the great realms of the Cameron, Davian, Karita, Lao, Silaj, and Steiner dynasties were founded. Their territories barely hemmed in between each other and the minor periphery states that encircled them, clashed again and again. Fleets of powerful warships delivered fighters and troops by the tens of thousands to worlds on every front, and many fell prey to nuclear and chemical weapons deployed on planetary scales. These were the years in which the technologies of warfare, driven by desperation and depravity, grew wild. In the Free Worlds League, where House Silaj held sway, the first abominations were born through the newly discovered genome splicing technology of grafting, producing great fighting monsters of flesh and metal. Not to be outdone, the Cameron-ruled Terran hegemony, successor to the fallen Alliance, eventually countered with the development of the first battle mechs. As the wars raged on, countless worlds fell into darkness and chaos, blackened by ash and pounded into blood-soaked mud by giants of flesh and bone, or titans of metal and myomer. It was only when the horrors of planetary extinctions came too close to their own homes that the Realm Lords turned increasingly towards their beasts and mechs as their civilized alternative to nuclear annihilation. Ironically, it would be the Lords of the Free Worlds League and Terran hegemony who led the human sphere out of this chaotic darkness. Thus dawned the age of the Star League. The Star League, 2570 to 2780. The creation of the Star League heralded an age of great enlightenment that would last for nearly 2 centuries before betrayal from within shattered it. A grand experiment conceived by the war-weary leaders of the Free Worlds League and the Terran hegemony. The Star League eventually united all 6 great realms and the lesser periphery states beyond them, beneath a single banner. For the first time in centuries, all of mankind was at peace. Thus began the Great Enlightenment. Backed by the power of Terra's royal bloodline, the Cameron dynasty, the elite Star League Knights and their peacekeeper armies maintained order throughout the human sphere. Conflict between noble houses were settled over the bargaining table rather than the battlefield. New technologies were developed, new worlds were discovered and brought to life, and fleets of mighty warships secured the interstellar trade routes. Weapons of mass destruction were outlawed. So too was the use of abominations as instruments of warfare. Grafting biotech was tightly restricted, permitted only for the purposes of human survival and biological research. Thus thrived humankind, and justice reigned. But no amount of justice can truly tame the passions of the human heart, nor can any miracle of science truly sate the human lust for ever greater wealth and power. Since time immemorial has the lesson been taught, no golden age may last forever. And so it was within the paradise of the Star League that the seeds of avarice, pride, and wrath were sown. As the decades of prosperity wore on, the Realm Lords grew restless. Unable to confront one another directly, they began to spar, through proxies, in the outlying realms of the periphery. But while the myopic lords focused on their more powerful neighbors, they ignored the rising fury of those whose world suffered most. In the industrialized systems of the Tarian Republic, they failed to notice the growing resistance to Star League taxation. Amid the luxurious vacation havens of the Canopian magistracy, they missed the sheer scale of criminal intrigue. The ominous silence among the hard-scrabble systems of the Outworlds fazed none among the Realm Lords, and not one of them paid any heed to the placid expanse that was the Rimworld's confederacy, whose sheer size, industry, and influence nearly rivaled that of any great realm. Thus arose the usurper. By the 2700s, the growing recalcitrance of the great realms weighed heavily on the Cameron. The Cameron what? The Cameron dynasty's efforts to maintain the Star League's stability. But while the lords of the Terran hegemony sought to head off crises through diplomatic means, tragedy struck with the death of First Lord Simon Cameron in 2751. Although no clear signs of sabotage were ever found, many believed the industrial accident which claimed his life was anything but accidental. In the meantime, the mantle of the Star League leadership fell to Simon's 8-year-old heir, Richard II, and Peacekeeper General Alexander Kerensky was appointed to serve as his protector and regent. Sensing weakness in their First Lord's youth, the other Realm Lords grew bolder. Their clandestine attacks against each other intensified, while their votes in the Star League Council increased economic hardship in the periphery. Worse still was the discovery of a terrifying new generation of abominations unleashed on unsuspecting worlds across the sphere. For the creation of these new monsters, the Realm Lords blamed one another and proclaimed their right to respond in kind. It was on this stage of rising hostilities and flagrant disregard for the rule of law that the First Lord Cameron found a new ally in Stefan Amaris, High Consul of the Rimworld's Confederacy. Under Star League rule, the Rimworlds professed ironclad loyalty to the Terran hegemony and its Cameron dynasty. From the earliest days, their confederacy's ruling house of Amaris swore fealty to the Camerons with an earnestness that put the other Realm Lords to shame. Few, therefore, knew that beneath this veneer of patriotism seethed a burning hatred for Terra and the other great realms. In secret, the Amarises marshaled their forces and forged hidden alliances while raising whole armies of battlemechs, legions of monsters, and fleets of warships far beyond the boundaries of the human sphere. And now, as the young Richard Cameron grew into maturity, he did so under the increasing influence of his false friend, Stefan Amaris. By 2765, nearly 2 centuries of pretense and placid tolerance was ready to end for every wrong, real and imagined, the arrogant Realm Lords had visited on the periphery states. Thus began the fall. It began with a periphery-wide uprising, far more organized and effective than the Star League could ever have imagined, and open warfare swept around most of the human sphere like a ring of fire. With most of the great realms caught off guard, responsibility for restoring order fell to the Star League Knights and their peacekeepers. In their stead, loyalist forces from the still quiescent Rimworld's Confederacy moved into hegemony space to assist the Terran Home Guards. In 2766, amid the year-end holidays on Terra, Consul Amaris struck the final blow by assassinating the First Lord and seizing the Cameron throne for himself. Across the hegemony, Confederacy troops swiftly destroyed their Home Guard counterparts with lightning speed. Within days, the Cameron dynasty was massacred and the Terran realms was firmly under control of the self-proclaimed Emperor, Stefan Amaris. Stunned, the other Realm Lords did little to oppose the usurper as he ordered Kerensky and his forces to stand down and swear allegiance to him. Instead, the Peacekeeper General turned his knights and armies against the Confederacy, smashing the traitor's home realm without mercy. As the Star League fell into civil war between Amaris and Kerensky, the great realms remained bystanders to the carnage, neither helping nor hindering either side. Horrors not seen since the Age of War were unleashed anew as the fighting raged on for nearly 15 years. By the time the conflict was over, hundreds of worlds across the human sphere lay in ruin, and an exhausted but victorious Kerensky stood over the smoldering corpses of the Amaris dynasty. Terra was freed, but its hegemony lay on its deathbed, held together only by the surviving knights and peacekeepers of the Star League. It was not to last. When the other Realm Lords gathered to decide the League's fate, they agreed only to strip the Peacekeeper General of his rank and position. Then each in turn proclaimed their own dynasty's right to assume the First Lordship. In the 4 years that followed, Kerensky desperately tried to convince the Lords to unite once more in the name of peace, only to be rebuffed. Every time. only to be rebuffed every time. Without exception, the Realm Lords chose their fateful course to ruin. Thus ended the age of the Star League. The Endless War, 2781 to present. Broken-hearted, Alexander Kerensky returned to the ravaged worlds of the Terran hegemony for what would be his last time. There, the defrocked Peacekeeper General summoned his most loyal knights and peacekeepers to Terra. Citing the certainty that a new age of war now loomed over the human sphere, he proposed a great exodus into the unknown, hoping to establish a new life far from the corruption and bloodlust of the disintegrating League. A third of the gathered warriors agreed to accompany Kerensky into self-imposed exile. In the year to come, Kerensky's followers coalesced into a grand fleet of vessels destined for the uncharted void. Thus retired the peacekeepers. But many knights refused to abandon their homelands, swearing instead to protect those who'd suffered the worst of the usurper's madness. They embraced the struggling remnants of the hegemony government and accepted the authority of its highest-ranking official, Prime Director Jerome Blake. As Kerensky and his followers fled the human sphere, Blake and his Minister of Communications, Konrad Toyama, reorganized the broken Terran hegemony into a new realm, the United Assembly of Stars, later to become the Unistar Ascendancy. Thus began the Great Reformation. Among the other realms, the fighting had already begun. Fleets of warships, armies of battle mechs, and waves of nuclear and chemical weapons bombarded the border worlds of nearly every great realm. Like the explosion of a supervolcano spewing fire, ash, and molten rock accumulated over centuries of rising pressure, the Realm Lords indulged the hate they'd struggled to suppress for nearly 20 generations, inciting an orgy of blood and death. Worlds were burned and blackened, bombs obliterated, factories and schools alike, and innocents died by the billions. Before long, abominations and grafting returned to the battlefield, sparking a horrendous new arms race in biowarfare with many unsuspecting planets falling prey to whole new breeds of specially crafted apex predators. Thus erupted the Endless War. Nearly 250 years have passed since the Star League fell, and the Endless War continues. The glory days of humanity's golden age now exist only in the ever fewer history texts that have survived the ongoing carnage. The periphery realms are extinct, whole swaths of interstellar space have been lost to the various realms, their populations killed off by disease, poison, starvation, and monsters of all forms and sizes. Knowledge and technology have been forgotten, erased on a scale few can even imagine, and still the Realm Lords continue to make war over all that remains. Thus have we been damned. The future. At the rate things are going, fewer and fewer people believe there will ever be anything beyond the Endless War, that any of the Realm Lords will ever muster the compassion and strength to finally win a lasting peace. But there remain those who believe that somewhere, beyond the human sphere, the exiled survivors of the once mighty Star League Knights and the peacekeeper armies of Alexander Kerensky still survive. For these true believers, the memory of humanity's last peacekeeper general is the brightest beacon of hope in a universe now plunged into shadow. All right, so there is the initial history. So far, I like it. Yes, it has very much of a 40K feel. But I like the twist. It's not, they didn't just go with, okay, there's demons, there's aliens. They came up with an in-universe way to do these giant monsters. Like put the game in by itself, and I don't think most people would realize or care. But anyways, it's a fun history. A lot of things that we still remember, but some new twists on it. All right. The human sphere as of 3015. Actually, let me zoom out. So here's the map. If you saw the unboxing, the game actually does come with a 3015 map, and it's a little bit more detailed. They actually detail these gray spots that are all around. So, anyways, let's keep reading. The Human Sphere, 3015. The human sphere of the 31st century is, in many ways, a shadow of its former self. In the golden age of the Star League, it was once a vibrant expanse of more than 3,000 inhabitant star systems, within a radius of more than 500 light years in all directions from humanity's homeworld of Terra. Where the fall of the Star League and the centuries-long endless war has seen whole regions of civilization fall into darkness and chaos. The six great realms now wage war for dominance over what remains, their empires shrinking and crumbling in the process. The realm of blood and steel, or Ironclad Alliance. Born from a collection of mercantile states, the Ironclad Alliance is an industrial powerhouse rivaled only by the Violet Crux and Terra Noire. Centuries of political corruption between corporate interests and the aristocracy have weakened this realm's military prowess, especially during the time of the Star League, but the endless war forced the dynasties of Steiner, Marsden, Kelswa, and Bradford to clamp down on such excesses in the name of survival. Ruler, Grand Archon Lise Bradford Steiner. Government, feudal monarchy. Capital, Arctophylax and Arcturus, or Arctophylax Arcturus. Dominant languages, German and English. Dominant religions, Assyrian, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Inhabited star systems, 254. Founding year, 2341. Currency, the mark. Realm of the Endless Dynasty, Collective of the Violet Crux. Since its founding, the Collective of the Violet Crux has evolved from a decentralized confederation of independent states into a true nation. Under the reign of the Endless Dynasty led by House Silage, the realm has focused its interstellar parliament and the worlds it represents to forge an economic and industrial powerhouse with a military to match. As pioneers of grafting, the Collective fields some of the most fearsome abominations ever seen. Ruler, High Prince Kadar Silage. Government, constitutional monarchy. Capitals, Luxor Regulus for the nobility, Unity Atrius for parliament. Dominant languages, English, Arabic, Greek, and Albanian. Dominant religions, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, Kemetism. Inhabited systems, 136. Founding year, 2271. Currency, the Ankh. Terra Noire, Unistar Ascendancy. Often promoted as the last lingering fragment of the Star League, the Unistar Ascendancy is, in truth, merely another of the League's successor states, albeit one with no noble dynasties to speak of. Raised from the ashes of the ruined Terran hegemony by powerful industrialists, the Ascendancy started out as a mega-corporate state, but as the endless war dragged on, its leadership became overrun by the dark, technocratic neo-religion of Terra Noire. Ruler, Primus Omnium Milcentus Kelsey Illustratum. Government, corporate theocracy. Capital, Unity Prima, Terra. Dominant languages, English, Latin, Greek, and Spanish. Dominant religions, Word of Toyama. Inhabited systems, 111. Founding year, 2785. Currency, Unistar dollar. Realm of the Celestial Throne, or the Golden Unity. Ever since its founding, the Golden Unity has struggled merely to exist. The Unity was always the smallest of the 5 outer realms, and its growth hampered as much by its weak economics as by the constant press of the neighboring kingdoms of Avalon and the Violet Crux Collective. Desperation has led its rulers to embrace grafting on levels few others would dare, and abominable corruption is now said to run all the way up to the Celestial Throne. Ruler, Chancellor Maximilian Liao. Government, dictatorship. Capital, Forbidden City, Capella. Dominant languages, Chinese, English, and Russian. Dominant religions, Liaoism, Buddhism, Taoism. Inhabited systems, 141. Founding year, 2386. Currency, yuan. Realm of the Blood Dragon, Draconic Imperium. Forged by the brutal strength and indomitable will of the Kurita dynasty, the Draconic Imperium is a realm dedicated to conquest to this day. Embracing a state-imposed culture based on the ideals of Terra's ancient feudal Japan, most warriors under the Imperium are thoroughly indoctrinated in the tenets of Bushido and value honor and duty to the blood dragon before all else. However, Imperium honor is a courtesy not often extended to dragons' foes. Ruler, Emperor Takashi Kurita. Government, feudal monarchy. Capital, Imperial City, Luthien. Dominant languages, Japanese and English. Dominant religions, Shinto and Buddhism. Inhabited systems, 212. Founding year, 2319. Currency, Ryu. Realm of the Blazing Light, or Shining Kingdoms of Avalon. The amalgamated realms of the Davian, Hassic, and Allard dynasties dominate the hierarchy of interwoven states known as the Shining Kingdoms. United in mutual defense against the combined might of the Draconic Imperium, Golden Unity, and Terra Noir, the kingdom sees its fight for survival as a holy crusade to protect the light of human civilization from savage barbarians and techno-zealots. Ruler, High King Ian Davian. Government, feudal monarchy. Capital, Camelot, Avalon. Dominant languages, English. Dominant religions, Christianity and Judaism. Inhabited systems, 269. Founding year, 2317. Currency, the pound. All right, so now we're actually going to get into some full histories of these factions. So, starting with the realm of the Blood Dragon, or the Draconic Imperium. The realm of the Blood Dragon is the amalgamation of several noble families dominated by the sheer power and will of the Kurita dynasty. Founders of the great realm known today as the Draconic Imperium, in the 7 centuries since the birth of this interstellar empire, the Imperium has leveraged its might to create a state and culture forged in the image of ancient feudal Japan. Brutal conquest, generational indoctrination, and the routine purging of undesirable elements have enforced a monoculture that exalts its warrior class, values duty to its liege lords, and holds itself to the ideals of Bushido and its civilian counterpart, Chonindo. History. The Draconic Imperium originated with the alliance of Galadon, a mutual defense pact negotiated by Shiro Kurita in 2302. Raised in the centuries-old military and social traditions of Terra's ancient Japan, Shiro and his brother Urizen saw themselves destined to forge a star-spanning empire. Together they had tamed their fractious homeworld of New Samarkand, and through its alliance with Galadon V, they procured the wealth needed to raise the planet-spanning militias that would become the backbone of a new army. Through a mix of diplomacy, deceit, and brute force, the alliance seized nearly 50 worlds by 2319, crushing all who resisted the Kuritas. Director Shiro then reorganized his empire, rechristening it as the Draconis Combine, and styling himself as the coordinator of worlds. The Combine, snaking its way from Altair and Diron to Pesht and New Samarkand, continued to grow over the decades to come, but soon found its expansions limited by the borders of several emergent states and the vast tract of interstellar dead space known as the Draconis Rift. Nevertheless, Shiro's Combine conquered and absorbed what it could, culminating in its 2330 invasion of the loosely governed but significantly populous Rassalhag Republic. Although the first coordinator of worlds did not live to see it done, the Rassalhag state ultimately fell to his empire after close to 40 years of warfare. Over the next 2 centuries spanning the Age of War, the descendants of Shiro and Urizen Kurita forged the Draconis Combine into a military powerhouse steeped in the social and cultural norms of Terra's shogunate-era Japan. While some coordinators relaxed or refrained from harshly enforcing policies, such as during the reign of Nihongi Kurita II in the 2430s, other agencies like the Order of the Five Pillars served to uphold and support the tenets of Bushido and cultural conformity by other, more subtle means. But when subjugated worlds openly resisted the Combine, embodied by the image of the Kurita dragon, sent in its troops and secret police to enforce the coordinator's will. Such was the fate of the Azami Caliphate worlds, whose defiant leaders were crushed during the reign of Yama Kurita. The Age of War ended with great reluctance. The Draconis Combine became the last major realm to join the Star League. By this time, the Combine found its empire hemmed in by other realms that equaled or exceeded its own might, each ruled by a dynasty that matched the Kuritas in ambition and will. The Steiners, Lyran Commonwealth, though the weakest of the military threats, boasted an unassailable economy and industry that kept its defenders well stocked and supplied. In contrast stood the Davian's federated sons, with a military prowess stubbornly on par with the dragon's own soldiery. And between the two loomed the technologically advanced Terran hegemony, whose battle mechs changed the face of warfare even more dramatically than the monstrous abominations of the distant Free Worlds League. Outward of these rivals was a lifeless expanse of cold stars and resource-poor worlds where only the most desperate could eke out an existence. In the age of the League, the Combine's efforts once again turned inward to combat the threat of cosmopolitan influences. Coordinator Urzian II launched a determined campaign that hardened his realm's culture. The principles of ancient samurai culture were reinforced at every level of society. Shinto became the state-mandated faith, Japanese the only recognized language for all but inter-realm trade and diplomacy. Jiri before ninjo, duty before heart, became the cornerstone of Combine life, as was the unquestioning deference to the dragon's authority. And for the warriors and nobility who stood at the top of the Combine culture, the ways of Bushido and the code of the samurai were paramount. Those who broke with these tenets could expect little mercy from their peers or superiors. Death became the most common solution to dishonor. In this way, would the Combine maintain its strength in the face of corruption and decadence of foreign gaijin. The dragon would never weaken. House Kurita chafed under the prolonged peace of the Star League. Periodically, several of their mech warriors would spar with the knights and peacekeepers of the Star League, pitting their skills and honor as samurai against those of the League's ace gunslingers. In the League's final century, the dragon would even take to covertly raiding its neighbors in the guise of unmarked pirates. But the greatest inter-realm conflict of the age came when the Combine launched a brief invasion of the Federated Suns in the name of defending a tenuous claim to that realm's throne. The 4-year War of Davian Succession, as it came to be known, was born of the brief union between Davian and Kurita royalty, which begat Vincent Kurita, a child of both dynasties. Despite legal measures taken to prevent a Kurita-raised scion from claiming its princedom, the Combine and the Suns came to blows when the Star League Council proved too slow and reluctant to intervene. The conflict was settled by peacekeeper intervention in the end, but not before the cracks in the Star League's imposed age of unity and peace became clear to all. When Stefan Amaris usurped the First Lord's throne and overthrew the Terran hegemony, less than 40 years after the Davian succession crisis, the Kurita dynasty braced for the League's inevitable collapse. Like the other 5 great realms, the Combine stood by as the Civil War erupted, with the self-styled Emperor Amaris and his loyalists on one side and Peacekeeper General Alexander Kerensky and his knights on the other. By the time the dust settled on a blackened Terra, Kerensky stood victorious, but the core of the Terran hegemony was gutted. In the aftermath, each of the realm lords proclaimed their right to rule in place of the extinguished legacy of Terra's Cameron dynasty, but the dragon ultimately became the first to declare war over it. Having spent the previous decade marshalling the Combine's forces, Coordinator Minoru Kurita had arrayed more than 100 battlemech regiments and an equal number of monster legions along his realm's inner borders. Thus prepared, Kurita waited only until the departure of Kerensky's knights to launch his first interstellar assaults. The endless war had begun. The Combine's preparedness paid off as its troops surged into the Lyran Commonwealth, the Federated Suns, and the war-torn remnants of the Terran hegemony, but not for long. On the hegemony front, an unexpectedly determined resistance emerged under the command of Aaron de Chevalier, the former right hand of the departed Kerensky, who now held the title of Terra's Protector General. Far from the edge of collapse, the Terran state had miraculously reorganized and rallied its citizens under a new order, the United Assembly of Stars, led by First Director Jerome Blake. Although still recovering from the hellish fighting of the Star League Civil War, Blake's UAS managed to repel several Combine incursions and force the invaders to fall back. An even greater disaster struck the Kurita dynasty on the Fed Suns front just 2 years later, when Minoru himself was assassinated on the recently captured world of Kentaris IV. Thrust suddenly onto the throne, Minoru's heir, Jinjiro Kurita, responded with the bloodiest conventional mass genocide to date, ordering the entire planet blackened and razed by legions of abominations and waves of battlemechs. The Kentaris massacre lasted for 6 months, at the end of which the only living humans on the planet were those who wore the bloodied insignia of the dragon. Hardened by this vengeance, Minoru rechristened his house and his realm to commemorate it. Henceforth, the domain of the Kuritas would be known as the realm of the Blood Dragon, and the Draconis Combine would be known as the Draconic Imperium. The enemy reaction to the Kentaris massacre was no less dramatic. Almost overnight, the armies of the Suns and the resistance cells on captured worlds began to fight with inhuman determination, eventually battering back the Imperium along the realm's borders. Where the draconic forces stood their ground, they faced hordes of crazed abominations in the blinding fire of nuclear bombardment. Reborn as the realm of the blazing light, the Federated Suns embraced a new identity, the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon, their newfound spirit matching the Imperium's brutality wherever they met in battle. In the decades to come, the Blood Dragon's initial gains of the Endless War would largely be lost amid a series of relentless offenses and counteroffenses until exhaustion and devastation led to stalemates on every front. In the centuries that have followed since, the fighting continued, pausing only for a few years here and there, in one region or another, all just long enough for either side to raise new legions of monsters and regiments of troops. In the wake of widespread industrial devastation and technological decay, the Imperium and its enemies have been reduced to salvaging whatever mechs and ships they can from the remains of war-ravaged planets, all to keep their armies ready for the next battle. Like the other great realms of the human sphere, the Draconic Imperium has seen whole worlds fall to the darkness and decay of savage weapons and the rampant destruction of infrastructure. The scars of this ceaseless conflict can now be seen across generations of mutated DNA and the hordes of the frayed. A new millennium has dawned on a human sphere that continues to decline, but the blood dragon remains unbowed. Philosophy and culture. The Draconic Imperium is a highly structured realm that establishes roles and rules for every layer of its society, from the lowliest unproductive to the Emperor himself. Honor in all things is the ideal to which all Imperium citizens, civilians, and military alike aspire. What determines this honor is strictly codified, and those who sully their honor face severe cost to redeem it. Even the criminal elements of the Imperium, from the Yakuza syndicates to wayward Ronin warriors, strive to lead honorable lives in the eyes of their superiors. Imperium society is rigidly stratified and warrior dominant. At the top sits the Emperor, formerly the Coordinator of Worlds, who has always been a male member of the Kurita bloodline with military training. Because Imperium society is strongly patriarchal, women can't formally claim the title, but that hasn't prevented the ascent of some Kuritan matriarchs who assume the role of regent. Directly below the Emperor sit the various shoguns, warlords who act as military leaders of vast interstellar districts known as shogunates, and who are held responsible for their collective defense and the maintenance of law and order. Although many shogunates have become hereditary fiefdoms of a single bloodline, all shoguns must be trained imperial military officers who have sworn allegiance to the Emperor. Shoguns who fail to meet these basic requirements, fail in their duties, or otherwise dishonor themselves may be replaced at the Emperor's will, and typically face execution as well. Imperium shoguns are assisted by daimyo, lesser administrators who may not necessarily be warriors but are treated as though they are of the warrior class regardless. Although their power typically extends no further than a single world, daimyo are held to the same standards of duty and honor as the shoguns they serve, and can be disciplined just as harshly for failure and dishonor. Samurai, the honored elite of the Imperium's warrior class, are likewise beholden to their shoguns, and stand roughly equal to daimyo in many respects, though they rarely act as administrators outside of their military duties. Salaried soldiers in the Imperium, who typically take the form of conscripts and non-commissioned officers, are kin to the samurai, and often seen as equal in all the ways that matter within the Imperium's social order. These rank-and-file troops, however, are more beholden to the realm at large than to any given shogun or daimyo, and thus are considered lesser warriors within the feudal hierarchy, making them the lowest tier of the warrior class, except for the wayward and leaderless Ronin. Below the warrior class sits the Imperium's civilians, the laborers, craftsmen, and merchants. Those who work to produce goods and expand the wealth of the realm are valued for their service and largely considered the backbone of Imperium society. When even this level of society is often stratified in terms of wealth, skill, and specialization, civilians collectively represent the realm's productive class. An important facet of Imperium culture is known as the Five Pillars. This concept reflects on the tiers of society in a way that demonstrates how they serve the greater whole of the realm itself, and is in turn interpreted by a special paragovernmental agency within the Imperium known as the Order of the Five Pillars, or O5P. The Pillar of Gold represents the government, from the lesser functionaries and administrators of the bureaucracy to the Emperor himself. The Pillar of Steel represents the military, the warriors who protect the realm and project its strength. The Pillar of Teak represents the Imperium's culture and people, whose work and inspiration is the lifeblood of the realm. The Pillar of Ivory represents the Imperium's religious and philosophical heart, the spirit and soul of its people. The Pillar of Jade represents the realm's wealth and economic might. Under the terms of the Dictum Honorium, the body of the social rules and treatises maintained by the O5P, should even one of the five conceptual pillars fall to corruption or weakness, the realm itself would be endangered. The dictum thus serves to ensure that those who serve the realm in some way understand how important their role is as part of this united society. It also serves as a formal, foundational guide for the traditions and societal expectations observed throughout the Draconic Imperium, defining good citizenship for all, regardless of their role.
Military might. The soldiers of the Blood Dragon, or SBD, also known as the Dragon's Teeth or the Emperor's Might, is among the most brutal standing armies in the realms of the human sphere. Once known as the Draconis Combined Mustered Soldiery, or DCMS, the SBD includes warriors raised from all strata of the Imperium society, trained under some of the harshest conditions to fight to the last breath for their emperor without question. Recruitment into the SBD, or the minor planetary militias that back it up, is open to all, regardless of class and gender, and military service may even be required by periodic regional or realm-wide conscriptions. Despite rigorous standards, however, the social stratification remains evident throughout all branches of service. While truly exceptional warriors can break through these barriers, most of the SBD's upper ranks are men and hail from wealthy or well-connected families. Access to superior training schools such as Anting University, Galadin Military Academy, and the Sunzong Mech Warrior Academy can likewise be restrictive to those less fortunate unless they prove themselves worthy in some other way. Even after recruitment and training, Imperium stratification can be seen among its standing forces, as the SBD's best equipped and maintained regiments tend to be those tied to, led by, or even wholly staffed by those of the more privileged classes of the Imperium's hierarchy. But this can be as much a blessing as it is a curse. Such high prestige units are more likely to find themselves on the front lines for every major campaign. This speaks strongly to a simple egalitarian truth in the Imperium mindset. All leaders lead from the front. But where those of more modest means and connections might be relegated to less prestigious commands with older, less effective gear and fewer opportunities for honor and glory, even these troops are more respected than the penal forces. These chain gangs, staffed by the Imperium's criminal element, and often conscripted at gunpoint, are the ones most likely to be sent on suicide missions, armed only with defective equipment and a complete lack of combat support. Like all other Great Realm militaries, the modern SBD relies heavily on battle mechs and abominations as the primary combat units for all ground warfare. Aerospace fighters, artillery, combat vehicles, and infantry are employed as supporting forces, providing less costly options for additional firepower and defensive operations. The Imperium collectively refers to its abominations as yokai, or spirits, with their frayed human counterparts known as yude, or ghosts. Most battlefield yokai are named and styled after creatures and demons from ancient Japanese folklore to add to their terrifying mystique. The harsh training and treatment these creatures endure at the hands of their masters often makes them nigh uncontrollable once unleashed, an aspect the SBD considers more of an advantage than a flaw, because most yude are the result of experiments on criminals and other undesirables in Imperium society. These frayed are considered nearly as subhuman as the more monstrous yokai, and so are often tasked with missions where complete success and survival are not expected, such as suicide charges and diversionary strikes. Realm of the Blazing Light, or Shining Kingdoms of Avalon. Under the guiding hands of the powerful Davian, Hasek, and Sandoval clans, originally, the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon grew from a vast pseudo-democracy known as the Federated Suns into a militarized collection of interwoven monarchies that often seems blessed by perennial fortune. Opposed on its borders by the Draconic Imperium, the Golden Unity, and Terra Noir, each demonized by the Avalonians as tyrannical oppressors, the kingdoms view themselves as the human sphere's last bastion for freedom and hope in an ever-darkening universe. Ironically, overzealous propaganda and centuries of this self-righteous mindset has created a great realm whose populace has embraced a culture where chivalry and eternal crusades are the highest of callings, and all those who disagree might as well be heretics by default. History. Like most of the great realms, the founding of the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon owes itself to the chaos of the crumbling Terran Alliance. Under the guidance of the Davian family, the prosperous breadbasket world of Avalon, then called New Avalon, forged the Crucis Pact, mutual trade and defense alliance with 19 other nearby systems. In 2317, the newly created Federated Suns would be ruled by a high council of planetary leaders, headed by a president chosen from among this same body. While many of the Suns' member worlds were themselves led or ruled by local monarchs and other autocrats, the democratic selection of the nation's leader would continue for a century. As the Federated Suns grew, its borders came into contact with those of other rising states, including the Chesterton Trade League and the Tikhonov Grand Union, progenitors of the great realm known today as the Golden Unity, and the Terran hegemony. But while the initial conflicts in the Age of War, such as the first clashes with Chesterton from 2318 to 2321, ended in defeat, the Sun's influence expanded to where the sheer size of its territory and bureaucracy could not be adequately served under its current government. In 2417, following an escalating crisis in the nation's leadership brought on by the unstable President Edward Davian, Simon Davian reorganized the realm into 5 marches, each led by a semi-autonomous prince, with a first prince established to rule as first among equals. The theoretical democracy of the realm's presidency, having already been dominated by the Davian dynasty for its entire existence, finally gave way to the inherited reign of Simon Davian, the initial first prince of the Federated Sons. Under the rule of its March Lords and their first prince, the Federated Sons weathered the rest of the Age of War with relative stability, surviving the ascent of the Draconis Combine, the Capellan Confederation, and the Terran hegemony, as well as the emergence of periphery states such as the Outworlds and the Taurian Concord. Ironically, the Sons' greatest challenge would once again come from within rather than without, as a succession crisis began with the passing of first Prince William Davian in 2512. Due to ongoing conflicts on the Capellan and hegemony fronts, the heir apparent was William's grandson, Alexander Davian, then only 5 years old. A council of 5 regents, each representing the realm's 5 marches, was elected to rule in the child's stead. But by the time the young Alexander came of age and took the throne, relentless politicking and the predations of war had broken down this council and left much of its power in the hands of the Varney family of the Capellan March. A 15-year civil war erupted, ending in 2540 with House Varney's defeat and the solidification of Alexander Davian as the Sons' true first prince. This so-called Davian Civil War was followed by several government and military reforms that would stand for centuries to come. But the conflict itself was already receding into memory when the realm opted to join the still-forming Star League in 2567, becoming the League's 4th member state. The eventual creation of the Star League peacekeeper armies further enabled First Prince Alexander to do away with lingering troublemakers in his own military by promoting them off to the international force. In the age of the Star League, the Federated Sons experienced its greatest growth since its formation. With the help of the Star League's science, new worlds were settled, new technologies explored. The Davians and their fellow March Lords embraced the chivalric ideals of the Terran hegemony's ruling Cameron dynasty, and soon adapted their own version of the same Neo-Arthurian culture. In 2712, this modern chivalry movement culminated in the renaming of New Avalon itself, establishing the capital world of the Federated Sons henceforth as the Isle of Avalon, or just Avalon for short. As part of the rechristening, many among the realm's nobility also referred to the Sons as the Shining Kingdom, but not until after the Star League's collapse would that term come into formal use. Shortly before the Star League's collapse, the Draconis Combine attempted to usurp the Sun's throne by capitalizing on an ill-fated marriage between a member of the Karita dynasty and a Davian scion. Despite legal measures taken specifically to head this matter off in advance, the Combine and the Sons went to war in 2725. The Star League's reluctance to intervene resulted in 4 years of open conflict between 2 of its founding members and shook the faith of many across the human sphere. By the time the peacekeepers arrived and settled things, many across the Suns were forced to accept that humanity's golden age was perhaps nearing its end. In the years that followed, relations between the Davian and Cameron dynasties cooled as the Suns built up its armed forces in anticipation of future crises. The amorous betrayal came as little surprise to First Prince John Davian. Despite earning quiet respect from the assassinated First Lord and Peacekeeper General Alexander Kerensky, and despite having himself espoused great hope for the Star League's future, John, like the other realm lords, offered little support to either side in the fighting that followed. To Davian and his March Lords, it was clear that this event was the beginning of the Star League's end, and recent fighting on the Sun's borders, with the Capellan Confederation and Draconis Combine, demonstrated that both states were just waiting for the Suns to drop its guard. As the Terran hegemony burned, Avalon massed battlemechs for wars yet to come. As each of the Realm Lords proclaimed their right to the Cameron throne, John Davian's own declaration was practically a formality. While rumors persist to this day that the late Richard Cameron would have personally favored Davian as his successor, in truth, the first prince saw no hope at all in rebuilding the Star League. His Federated Sons was on its own, with fighting already breaking out as the various realms moved to annex the ruined hegemony systems. For the Federated Sons, the endless war began in May of 2787. When the Draconis Combine launched a massive, border-spanning surprise assault. Despite decades of preparations, the Suns had emphasized much of its battle mech defense around a potential Capellan invasion they believed was more imminent. This was because they had most recently sparred with Capellan forces in the early 2760s, prior to their hegemony land grab. With word that the Combine was occupied on its distant Lyran front, it seemed impossible that House Karita would surge into the Suns in such numbers. Almost immediately, the Davian realm was on its back foot, and its losses were staggering. 9 bloody years later, fate dealt the Fed Suns its cruelest hand on Kentari's 4. Coordinator Jinjiro Kurita, in response to the assassination of his father Minoru Kurita on the recently captured planet, ordered the death of the entire population via the bloodiest conventional mass genocide to date. Over the course of 6 months, Kentari's was blackened and razed by legions of abominations and waves of battle mechs. To commemorate this wanton bloodshed, Kurita recast its birthright, the realm of the Blood Dragon, and declared that the Draconis Combine would henceforth be known as the Draconic Imperium. Instead of breaking the Sun's morale, the Kentari's massacre inflamed its people. Practically overnight, resistance cells on captured worlds fought with inhuman determination, and the armies of the Federated Suns struck back hard with hordes of battle mechs, abominations, warships, and nuclear blasts. The March Lords of Davian, Sandoval, and Hasek reaffirmed their noble partnership and proclaimed their holdings the realm of the blazing light, their new identity serving as both an inspiration to their peoples and a warning to their enemies. Under their combined righteous fury and determination, the Federated Suns was rechristened as the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon, a beacon of hope and defiance for all its citizenry. In time, the kingdoms forced their enemies back until the devastating toll of the war left them in an exhausted stalemate. The endless war has raged on the kingdom's borders ever since, its intensity waxing and waning as each generation of warriors and monsters arrive on the front, only to be exhausted decades later. Whole worlds have fallen to darkness and decay. Rampant destruction has shattered supply lines and ruined critical infrastructure. With fewer and fewer resources available every year, the Shining Kingdoms has bled planets just like its neighbors have. Systems and industries lost to weapons of mass destruction have led to ever-thinning fleets of jump ships and drop ships to maintain trade networks, move troops, and shore up supplies. And yet the battle for survival has continued into a new millennium. Humanity's golden age may be lost forever, but the Shining Kingdoms of Avalon endures. Philosophy and culture. Since its founding, the Shining Kingdoms has rooted its culture and philosophies in a romanticized version of Old Terra's Western European nation-states, particularly those of the ancient British Empire. While the kingdom styles itself a free and open society where citizens are allowed their choice of religion, employment, speech, commerce, and movement, most of the nation's true socio-political power resides in an aristocracy and monarchs bound by constitutional laws. These wealthy elite have collectively kept the peace over the centuries by assuring their citizenry that they alone represent the best of humanity and stand now as moral paragons against a universe filled with barbarian tyrants. At the top of the kingdom's society sits the High King, a term used irrespective of gender. The High King has always been a member of the Davian family, the leading dynasty in the realm of the blazing light. After several internal crises over the centuries, the kingdoms meticulously established the legal lines of succession that effectively enshrines the power, while also establishing the High King's responsibilities to their people. In addition to being from the blazing light, the kings must also meet educational, military, and public service criteria, while also honoring the pacts that bind them to the various lesser nobles of the realm and vice versa. These rules ensure that not only will the High King be competent to reign, but they also reaffirm the interlocking loyalties that hold the kingdom's varied fiefdoms together as a collective whole. Below the High King sit the March Lords, each one a king in their own right, although most use the term March Lord to forestall any confusion. Granted power over a vast swath of space in the High King's name, these partner dynasties direct the military defense of their appointed regions, harness their industrial and infrastructural resources, and act as the ultimate arbiters for all legal matters that fall below the realm-wide level. Once there were 5 such marches, corresponding to the 4 outer border zones, Capellan, Draconis, Terran, and Periphery, and the central region around Avalon itself. But today, the gradual losses of the Endless War have reduced this number to 3. The Gold March faces the Golden Unity, the Blood March faces the Draconic Imperium, and the Avalon March covers the rest of the realm. Assisting the March Lords in their task are several layers of nobility, from dukes and earls to viscounts and barons. Many of these inherited titles are appointed, or revoked, by the March Lords as they see fit, but some of the lesser titles are open to public elections to assure the citizenry that they at least have some say in local politics. Below the nobility, various freedoms are guaranteed to the common folk under the kingdom's laws, including broad freedoms of expression, religious faith, cultural practices, and the like. These liberties provide a sense of egalitarianism among the realm's populace, as they technically make it possible for anyone to achieve the education and opportunities available to their society's upper classes, regardless of race, gender, or faith. Socioeconomic barriers do exist among the commoners, but the vast majority tend to believe these barriers to be more a factor of luck than a system rigged in favor of the wealthy and the well-connected. Unsurprisingly, the state government and its ruling aristocracy have their hands in most of the realm's largest media conglomerates, educational systems, and spiritual organizations through which they encourage such beliefs to maintain the status quo. However, one social advancement option is truly open to all, even to the lowliest dregs and outcasts of kingdom society, the military. Whether in the form of planetary militias and the paramilitary services, the warrior house orders maintained by various duchies, or among the glorious defenders of Avalon, all branches of military service are open to any able body who seeks to join. Recognized and romanticized by all levels of the kingdom's ruling class as the stalwart protectors of all that is righteous and honorable, the military not only provides for the common defense, but also offers many a solid chance to join the nobility, or at least a place among the realm's vast gentry. Indeed, reaching certain levels of command rank in the GDA or warrior house order not only equates to attaining knighthood in the realm, but can potentially offer a shot at even higher, more prestigious, and more lasting levels of noble peerage. For many of these reasons, there is a genuine, realm-wide admiration for the kingdom's warrior class, one that often borders on hero worship among those who, for whatever reason, never find themselves in their ranks. Military might. The glorious defenders of Avalon, also known as Our Majesty's Glorious Defenders, represent the Shining Kingdom's primary military force in the modern age. Many throughout the human sphere recognize the GDA as perhaps the most efficient and professional standing army amongst the great realms, known for its strategic innovations and effective use of combined arms warfare. Valuing flexibility over dogma, defenders utilize training regimens that may not be as brutal as those of their opponents, but their methods have produced some of the most creative tacticians seen since the fall of the Star League. Recruitment into the GDA is open to all citizens of the Shining Kingdoms, regardless of race, gender, and social status. While military service is mainly voluntary, many worlds throughout the kingdoms have or periodically enact policies that make service mandatory for all able-bodied persons, and accept membership in the GDA or a recognized warrior house order as fulfillment of such obligations. Most of the kingdom's nobility also bear a duty to serve in the defenders for at least 5 years to benefit fully from their titled status, and it is no small matter of pride to exceed this tenure for the sake of the country and crown. Most worlds in the Shining Kingdoms maintain their own combat training facilities and local academies, but some of the best military schools can only be found among the wealthiest and most developed systems. The Albion and Avalon Martial Academies, for instance, are based on Avalon itself, with annexes found only on Cathil in the Gold March and Robinson in the Blood March. The Robinson Battle Academy and the Cathil War College are close contenders for both of these primary institutions, as was the Warriors Hall on New Syrtis prior to its loss in 2982. Enrollment in these prestigious academies can be prohibitively expensive, but even the less affluent may find themselves in their halls with the right sponsorship. Backing up the primary military forces and training programs are those of the warrior house orders. A concept derived from those of the neighboring Golden Unity, the kingdom's orders are supplemental, semi-autonomous military commands raised by the most loyal dukes and duchesses of the realms. Tasked with aiding the March Lords in their regional defense, the orders may only operate outside of these districts on the direct authority of the High King, and are limited in total formation size to a maximum of 1 regiment each of mechs, abominations, and aerospace fighters, backed up by up to 3 regiments of non-mech armor and infantry. Unsurprisingly, the Allard, Hasek, and Davian warrior houses are the best trained and equipped of these orders, but other notables include the Cunningham, De Vries, and Varney warrior houses. In many cases, the warrior house orders act as secondary training forces within and against which the most promising warrior cadets can receive some real field experience before their final posting to a frontline command. While the modern GDA is well known for its combined arms approach to warfare, battle mechs and abominations remain the backbone for most of its line regiments. Aerospace fighters, artillery, combat vehicles, and infantry are commonly attached to these regiments on a semi-permanent basis, resulting in a strategic formation the GDA refers to as a Regimental Combat Team, or RCT. The kingdom's approach to abominations is one of ever-growing reluctance. While the use of monstrosities, as they tend to call them, has been a proven element of modern warfare since the 25th century. The use of such biotech clashes harshly with a carefully cultivated image of the kingdoms as a haven for all that is just and righteous. Great pains are taken to treat abominations as humanely as possible, likening them in many ways to any other trained beast used in policing and battlefield support. But the fact remains that abominations are unnatural beings, too savage, grotesque, and powerful for the populace to recognize as anything other than shameless horrors. Efforts to offset such opinions by cosmetic means, or by selecting creature designations based on classical lore and playing up their heroic traits on the kingdom's behalf, have met with little success. Some in the realm have even proposed phasing out monstrosities entirely. Frayed humans are treated with a bit more compassion. On the other hand, as most within the kingdoms are volunteers whose battlefield injuries left them unable to function or contribute to society without their biotech grafts. All right, so at this point, instead of going into the realm of the Celestial Throne, or Golden Unity, we're actually going to take a break. This video's gone about an hour now, and so I've decided, unfortunately on the fly, that I'm going to split this up into 2, probably 3 different videos. So come back next Sunday when we'll have part 2, where we should finish all of the major houses, and we'll see how much farther we get. But I do hope you enjoyed it. Me personally, I think this is an interesting twist. The universe so far is not as dark as everybody kind of says it is. I know people kind of equate this to 40K, kind of a grimdark setting, and while there's definitely elements there, to see things like, I forget the stupid name of it. The Golden Unity? Is that what it is? Or Realm of the Blazing Yet Light. Why did I mess that up? Seems a lot more honorable. Seems like a, quote unquote, the good guys. Obviously, we've still got to read over the rest of the realms. But, between the Draconic Empire, and the Shining Kingdoms, I know everybody will kind of hate it because that's how they've always gone. Davian, again, seems kind of like the good guys here. So overall, I like what they're doing. They're giving a good history. They're not overwhelming us, and it's some fun information. So that is part 1. As always, like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you are new here, so that way you don't miss out on the future episodes. Again, the next one will come out next Sunday, so please come back for that. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you next time.